What is going on, everybody, and welcome to Vancity Beats, Eats,
and more.
My name is Jamal. Thank you so much for tuning in. We are on Season 2, Episode 26, and today we are live from the Eastside Arts Society office here in East Vancouver on Hastings Street. And we are joined today by the Artistic and Executive Director of Eastside Arts Society, Esther Rosenberg. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me. I'm really happy to be here.
We're very happy to be here as well. If you're just tuning into the show for the first time, Vancity Beats, Eats, and More is a show where we highlight and spotlight the different creatives and creative organizations who are building community in our city. And today we are very lucky to be with Eastside Arts Society because of their legacy, but also the impact that they have created and are continuing to build for our beautiful city. And also, while we're on that topic, I do want to mention that the land that we're on is the stolen and unceded traditional lands, ancestral lands of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations, and we are grateful for their stewardship and care of the land since time immemorial. So as I mentioned, we're here on Hastings, here at the Eastside Arts Society office, and our show is to highlight different individuals and organizations. And today we're with the Artistic and Executive Director, Esther, where we're going to talk a little bit about the Eastside Arts Society, but also go into everything that is within that umbrella, because there's so many different initiatives that have grown from Eastside Arts Society. And we're also going to get to know Esther as well. So thanks so much for tuning in, and buckle up, because we're just about to get into it. So how are you feeling today?
I'm feeling great. I'm feeling just wonderful, and I'm happy to be here. And I'm also really happy to be presenting the arts in East Vancouver. Very passionate about that because I grew up here, and I'm one of the few people that can actually say they grew up in East Vancouver, but this is my hood, as we used to say in the last century. But this is my area, and I'm very passionate about everything that goes on in the East End.
Yeah, and that's right. I mean, I didn't grow up here. I know a lot of people kind of say that you know, a lot of people you meet in Vancouver maybe didn't grow up here or have come here from somewhere. So this is a special opportunity. Which part of East Van did you grow up in?
Not that far from where we are.
Yeah.
I grew up on 2200 block East Pender, so pretty much about, 16 blocks to the east of us, up near Hastings and Nanaimo.
Yeah, just a pleasant walk.
It is actually, yeah.
And because right now we're in Strathcona, is the area that we're in right now.
Strathcona, downtown Eastside, Falls Creek Flats, there's kind of different names. The city keeps kind of changing the boundaries depending on what they're doing politically, but I would say it's overall this area here is Strathcona / downtown Eastside.
And how was your experience growing up in East Vancouver?
Oh, my experience. Well, that's a loaded question, actually. Well, I wasn't prepared for that one. Well, I got to kind of step back a little bit with that. I'm first generation, so my family were political refugees. My father was Jewish, and so basically he's one of the few survivors from Europe, I would say. And my parents immigrated here in the 1950s. They were in a political refugee camp for several years. And anyway, long story short, they landed in East Vancouver. And at that time, I mean, it still is kind of that, but mostly it was immigrants from Eastern Europe, I would say predominantly in this area, yeah.
And then in terms of like the environment of growing up in this area, how did it look at that time? Was it different than what it looks like now?
Yeah, I guess. I mean, it was always been what I would call, I don't know if we still use this word, but a great deal of diversity culturally, I would say. And so that was what I think made this area really special. Was the diversity of this community in terms of the different languages that were being spoken, the different cultures that were represented here, the different foods that you had access to. So I would say it was pretty unique and pretty special.
And you are yourself, are you an artist? Do you express yourself creatively?
I am. I'm a photo-based artist is one of the things that I do when I'm not in this position.
Yeah.
trying to create change in East Vancouver and trying to develop programs that are building capacity for artists and engaging the public in that journey. Yeah.
And how did you first discover your creative art expression?
Oh, it's interesting because you know, when my parents moved here, they moved here with nothing really. So the house was really devoid of anything, I would say, cultural. It just and I don't even know how this happened, but somehow my father got a catalog of Robert Rauschenberg. So I don't know if you know that famous artist, who doesn't know him. And so he went, oh, this is our namesake. And so that was my first introduction to contemporary art, was this catalog and an assemblage, a photo of an assemblage of his work. And that, I would say, was my first introduction to the visual arts. That and one of the schools, the high schools that I went to, had a dark room. And so I got involved in darkroom processing and was really, you know, and who doesn't get excited about that? You know, when you see things developing and the image starts to emerge, and it's a pretty exciting moment. So I was involved in sort of darkroom classes in my high school at Britannia.
Just nearby.
Just nearby, exactly.
Another pillar of the East Van community. And so can you tell us a bit about how you got involved in Eastside Arts Society? What is kind of like the origins of it?
Yeah. Well, I would say the visual arts is kind of like an interesting discipline because there are very few, you know, at that time when we started the what we call the culture crawl, which was, now we're in its 28th year. So it's been a long time. My partner, actually, Richard Tatro, came up with the name Culture Crawl. He also did the iconic crow that you see most of the time as representing the culture crawl.
Yeah.
I think we had studios in the east side of Vancouver. There were a lot of artists here when studio rent was inexpensive. Some of you might not remember those days, but some of us do, which is certainly not the case now. And so we decided to, there were 3 buildings, Parker Street, we were called Panaficio, and the Glass Onion. And we sort of, you know, at some point kind of came together and said, well, why don't we do something jointly and cooperatively and collectively? And that was sort of the birth of the culture crawl. And it really was in response to the fact that there was very few opportunities for visual artists to show their work and connect with the public. You know, there was, you know, a smattering of private galleries. There's a couple of artist-run centers, and then there are the bigger kind of institutions like the Vancouver Art Gallery and the Contemporary Art Gallery. But there were very few opportunities for artists to be exhibiting their work and connecting with the public. And we thought, well, we have our studios. Why don't we invite the public in to not only see the work, but to also kind of begin to understand the process and to see kind of what some of the influences are that are impacting an artist's creation and their art practice. So it really was always a bit deeper than just selling work. I mean, that clearly is one aspect of it, but it's only one part of that equation. It really is about engaging the public and connecting them with the artist practice, and them kind of seeing, behind the scenes as to what goes on, and how an artist, is influenced by, some of the things that they have in their studios, and how they, if they're a printmaker, how do they create a print? What's involved with that?
Yeah, that is. I mean, it's such a cool initiative because, like you said, it invites people into the working space of the artists.
Yes.
Whereas, like, if you go to a gallery or something, someone has just brought their work there and displayed it. So, giving that insight on the environment that the artists are working in, but not only that, as you said, there's so many factors that can influence the process, including the location, maybe the physical space. So yeah, I love that invitation to the public to get to see so much more.
Yeah, and I have found over the years, including myself, when I first started stepping into galleries, I was really intimidated and I was a bit uncomfortable, and some of them were less inviting than others, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think we've all experienced some of that. I think that's becoming less and less a thing, but it certainly was when I first started to kind of, step into, some private galleries. Public galleries, not so much that, but private galleries, it wasn't necessarily the most comfortable place to be, and I think that that's the case for a lot of people, and I find that over the years of being involved with the Culture Crawl, now in the capacity as the artistic and executive director, that I talk to a lot of people, and they really do like the fact that it is inviting, and you don't have to be, you don't have to be an art historian to come and experience this world, and enter into these studios and have conversations with artists. You don't have to be an art expert. You can just come and you can respond and you can react and you can think about things, and it's just really it's worked for a lot of people. It's often their first sort of introduction to the visual arts medium, and I know that people have gone on and then ventured out into, the other places that are exhibiting art, the private galleries, the artist-run centers, and the museums. So yeah, it's a great way for people to first enter and get introduced to the medium.
Yeah, that direct approach. Also, as to elaborate, like, you can also ask questions to the artists directly. I have a cousin who has been involved in the Culture Crawl, and so that was my introduction to the Culture Crawl, was through them, because they were participating and they invited us to come check it out. So yeah, and it was cool checking out their space. It wasn't only them in that space. There were maybe 5 or 6 other artists. So that, yeah, it opens up so much to discover. And
it does.
Yeah.
And it really deepens the experience, that you have. And I found, people coming into my studio, just the reactions and the responses that people have to your work, and everybody is different in terms of what they're seeing in a piece, or what they're not seeing in a piece. And even for myself, I mean, of course I go around and I try to see some of the new artists that are participating in the crawl, and I'm always surprised by the work that's there. I'm also surprised sometimes by my own biases in terms of what I think I like. And sometimes I found myself looking at some art and sort of dismissing it because it's not my thing, or I think it's not my thing. And then I engage in a conversation with the artist, and they start to explain the work, and then all of a sudden I'm like involved in it, and I'm like, wow, I didn't see it. Now I'm getting this. And I understand how you got to this point. And so I'm continuously surprised by what I'm experiencing and what I'm seeing, and where that artist's mind goes to, and how they put that, forward.
Yeah. Yeah, that's such a cool engagement
Yeah.
and exchange
Yeah, it
that
is.
you've created space for.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so you mentioned the Culture Call kind of so it started in 96, which is incredible.
Yeah.
And then you said it started with kind of 3 main studio
Studios, yeah.
spaces. How has it grown since 96?
Right. Well, back then it was mostly volunteer run. So, I was a volunteer along with many, many others. And we kind of plodded along that way and just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And then eventually we formed, I think in 2003, we formed a nonprofit society. And then later on, we actually got charity status. I've been in this position now for 12 years, and I'm really just, starting to kind of change or I'm adding to the programming because I'm seeing many more opportunities for artists and for this community. But also what I started to see, having been involved with the crawl for so long, is that, and then when I took on this position, what I started to see was, and we were getting a lot of phone calls about, were artists being evicted. And that was sort of like the the canary in the coal mine moment. We're getting these calls and having to respond and trying to figure out, well, how can we save these buildings? And I think behind you, I'm not sure if this is getting into the video or not, is a painting by an artist at 901 Main. And that building is still currently vacant as we speak, 15 years later. But
And just empty?
Yeah, empty. The owners evicted all of the artists. It was an artist building for decades, and they evicted 40 artists, and it was that situation that really prompted this organization to get involved more so in terms of advocating for artist production space, and that's where we find ourselves today, because we started to realize, well, if we're not doing that, who is? And there has to be a voice to ensure that artists are, if we say, and a lot of people say this, artists are critical to the vibrancy and the soul of a city, and I honestly believe that. And if we do believe that, then we have to put our money and our energy toward ensuring that artists are a part of this community. And as we know, affordability for everybody, it's unaffordable. So we're trying to find ways and means of ensuring that not only do we retain the spaces that we have here, but we add to the spaces. And this isn't, just to be clear, this isn't just about visual artists, it's also about performing artists. We're at this point really speaking out for all arts disciplines, because all art forms are being impacted by the unaffordability and the lack of space in this city.
Yeah, because at its core, it is the physical space that is being impacted,
right?
And that's where the creation of art or performance takes place as well, under a roof, within the walls,
right,
of these actual spaces. So if we can maybe provide some context to our audience, like, what role has East Vancouver played, the East Side, in the story of Vancouver?
Yeah, well, because we're situated in what is primarily commercial and industrial land, this has been a real area of attraction for artists, because you had these buildings that historically used to be relatively inexpensive because they were warehouses or they were here for industrial purposes that are no longer of use anymore. And so there were these large spaces that you could rent. We were my partner and I were in a space on Railway Street. We had 2,000 square feet. It was huge. We could ride our bikes around their studio. I mean, it was just like, whoa, Yeah. And now we find artists working, in 100 square feet. So you can see the change. I mean, from 2,000 to 100 square feet. But this is really where the heart and soul of artistic production comes from. It might land in other parts of the city, in the different theaters and galleries, but this is really where the this is where the work happens. This is where the rehearsals happen. This is where the development of art happens. And we started to realize, we did a study, which I'll just point out, as
Yes.
City Without Art, No Net Loss.
Plus.
And plus, exactly. Thank you for noting that. Very important. And through doing this study, which I might add is an award-winning study
Yes.
by the planning associations, but what we started to realize was how much we were losing in terms of space, and we need to stop that bleeding from happening. But what we also realized is that this part of Vancouver has the highest ratio of artists per capita than anywhere else in Canada. And so to lose that would be should be scandalous. It should never be allowed to happen. So we have to put a stop to that. And so from that we developed this whole concept, about the Eastside Arts District. And so on the back end, the Eastside Arts District is all about space development. And it's all about changing policies where we can. It's all about ensuring that artists have spaces to work in this part of the city. And so there's a lot of work going on in tandem and in cooperation with the city. They are partners with us on this. And I do think that, our first report was a real eye-opener for people. And they went, wow, I had no idea there were that many artists here, that there was so much production happening here. Because it's all quietly happening behind closed doors in these kind of what I would call nondescript buildings.
Totally.
I don't even know half of what's going on here, And I thought I had my thumb on the pulse.
Yeah.
And actually, in developing the district and going around and doing stakeholder engagements, we're realizing there's just this, there's so much more going on than what we even thought was going on in this neighborhood. So it's very vibrant and it's very active, and we want to ensure that continues on, because we don't want to lose all of that activity.
Yeah.
That's part of who we are here.
Yeah, and it's amazing that you were able to recognize that as the organization and start to take steps to address it and actually create all this work and do all this work investing in that cause. How, in terms of providing more context and background, why are the spaces becoming less affordable? What is causing that to happen?
I guess, I think a lot of people don't realize how small Vancouver really is. And I think people think Vancouver is quite big, but it's not.
In terms of
geographical land mass,
yeah.
Exactly. And so because you kind of take into account West Vancouver, North Vancouver, Burnaby, Richmond, and people see, but that's not Vancouver. That's Richmond, that's North Vancouver, that's West Vancouver. It's not Vancouver. And when you really look at, if you really look at Vancouver and you think about it in this way, Vancouver is 120 blocks north-south, give or take, 120 blocks east-west, give or take, and then you have the downtown core. And that's really it. It's not huge. And so the competition for this land is immense. Who doesn't want to live here? I grew up here. I love it here. I love the mountains. I love the water. I love the nature. I mean, this is an incredible part of the world.
We are very lucky.
We are very lucky here, and other people want to share in that.
Yep.
As we've seen. And so the demand here, and also the shift in terms of real estate is now looked at as an investment tool. When I was growing up, it was really about, getting a home and having a home, and that's what you lived in for the next 40, 50 years. That's really shifted. Real estate is seen as something that you invest in, either for, temporary accommodations like your Airbnb, or something that you hold on to, as opposed to putting your money in stocks and what have you. So there's been a real shift, a societal shift in terms of how we view real estate. And it's really moved away from it being, a home and something that provided shelter into something else. So when you look at all these different factors, you see, the demand is there for what is a very little bit of land, real estate. There isn't a whole lot. So how do you work within that and those constraints and still ensure that you have what is important to have in a city, which is your arts and cultural communities, still being able to survive here. One of the things, of course, that we focused in on is focusing in on commercial and industrial land, and that's where the kind of the economic lands are, and what you need in order for a city to survive. You need a place where people are working and making money in order to survive and in order to live. So this is an area that we strategically have focused in on because housing isn't an issue on these lands. I can't compete, or we can't compete with housing. Housing is critical here, and there's a huge shortage and a huge demand, and we need to have more housing. But how do we balance having an artist studio versus a place for somebody to live in? So recognizing that we don't want to compete with housing, but we can develop artist production space in commercial and industrial lands.
Yeah, and I mean, what you were mentioning about the shift in perspective of real estate that can be applied like on an individual level, right? But then in terms of the East Side being more commercial type of zoning, or those types of buildings,
right?
Then it also plays into these bigger players like developers, land developers, or who are also, there's a super high demand for that commercial land to build. They could be building housing, but they're taking away space that could potentially be for working studios.
Sure. But in commercial and industrial, they can't. I mean, the zoning prohibits that.
Okay.
So that's where we feel like we have the greatest opportunity in terms of developing artist production space. And I think that there are ways that we can all work together. I mean, developers do what they're only allowed to do. And they can push and they can influence and do those kinds of things. But ultimately, it's the city saying, yes, you can, or no, you can't. A developer can't just go and plunk down a building and say, I'm going to do 40 stories here, and you can't stop me. That's not the case. Yeah. I can tell you that. That's not happening. Yeah. So I think we all need to work together.
Okay.
And say and look at how can we work together and ensure that artists are part of this community, and that we do have spaces that we can work in. And I think that, the city has lots of different policy tools that it can put forward. Density bonusing being one of them. Community amenity contributions are another. Density levies, another. So the city actually has a lot of tools in its toolbox that it can actually utilize to ensure that there are adequate artist production spaces within this community, and that's what we're working on. And so far, I think the relationship has been, and the partnering has been really good. It's slow and it's incremental, and we're not seeing anything big just yet. But it is going to result in more artist production space. There's no question in my mind. I think we're heading in the right direction, and I think that the Eastside Arts District is contributing to that. So as I mentioned, in the back end, it is working with the policymakers, the people at the city council and staff. And on the front end, I think what's going to create a healthier and more vibrant community is the public-facing aspect of the district, which is people knowing about the different activities that are happening here, and creating this ecology, this really kind of healthy and vibrant arts ecology that can happen here and thrive here, where people would go on the website and find out that somebody's doing a rehearsal and they want people to come to the rehearsal. And so somebody comes to their rehearsal and then they go, oh, I want to go over to one of the craft breweries and I'm going to go and have something to eat and a beer. And then I'm going to go to a performance at the Cult or at the Fire Hall or at the York Theater, you know, or anywhere else, because there's lots of other hidden gems that are offering performances within the community. And so I think that, on the public facing, support from the public and starting to come and discovering some of the performances and some of the art activities and events that are happening is going to create a healthier environment.
Yeah, absolutely. In terms of the public facing too, I can relate because when I first moved to Vancouver, I was living in Dunbar, which is southwest of the city. And all I knew and heard was like all the action and activity is in East Van.
That's here, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and so last year I was fortunate to get the opportunity to live in East Van, and that's where I'm based now. And I'm still just getting to know all of these places that are tucked in like discrete areas. Yeah, you wouldn't know unless you took the decision to walk down the street, and then saw that there's this like creative lab, or you know, all sorts of different interesting spaces and of different disciplines too.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, and it's so cool because the Culture Crawl especially opens everyone's studios to the public. So, but the amount of studios that you have access to is massive.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
And I always say, you know, we kind of joke where, you know, sometimes when I go to an art opening that's on the other side of Main Street, and we always joke, oh no, Esther's like stepped outside of the boundaries and she's going to an art event.
Is she coming back?
on the west side. Because I rarely leave the east side, and there's rarely a reason for me to leave the east side, except I do go to the Vancouver Art Gallery, and I love their exhibits, and there are other galleries that I do go to, but we often joke that, you know, I rarely step out of the east side because there's just so much activity here. There's just so much to see and participate in. And I also think that the Eastside Arts District is going to even contribute to even greater opportunities. And it's just going to like just build and build and build. I'm very optimistic about it because I do believe that we've studied different cultural districts and how they have evolved or not evolved, and how some have been successful and others haven't. And, you know, we're really wanting to see this. This is pretty much coming up from the ground up. It's coming from the arts community. It's not coming from a developer. It's not coming from the government and a top down, although we are working in partnership with the city on this. And we do need their support because it's not going to just happen by us trying to kind of blaze our way through this and develop it. We do need their help. And so the partnership is important. But we do want to say artists first, and this is really what's driving it, is the arts community. And I'm here to do the work on behalf of the artists. I'm not here to do the work on behalf of anybody else. That's what interests me, and that's what's propelling this.
And the Eastside Arts Society, you know, as it says in the name, that is, the organization is representing the artists. And I mean, based on what the reputation of East Vancouver, like the artists contribute so much to how East Vancouver not only is known, but how it's actively lived every day. So yeah, that's really cool. So let's trace a little bit of the history, I guess. So Culture Crawl started in 1996. Then Eastside Arts Society, as the nonprofit and now charity,
we're charity.
Was created in 2003?
2003, yes.
Yeah,
and it was actually the Culture Crawl, and we changed the name in, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 years ago, because we started to realize that our programming and our mission was far greater than doing the Culture Crawl. And so, not that the culture crawl is small by any
Nope.
stretch of the imagination. It's a massive undertaking and utilizes a great deal of our resources, working
Yes.
with 500 plus artists every year. But along the way, we've also added, during the pandemic, we decided to stupidly, and I hit myself on the head. I wish somebody else had smacked me and said, "What are you doing? Are you insane? You want to start another festival?"
Yeah.
Yes, sure, why not? And of course, the pandemic hit, and we started this festival called Create,
Yeah.
which was interesting because it was so much of the time, because it was an outdoor festival and it was an art making festival. And it was held in the park. And it was one of the few activities that people could actually participate in when we were literally in the throes of pandemic mania. And we were all afraid to, connect with anybody and step outside and all of that. Create actually, provided an opportunity for people to come outside and to actually make something. And I think a lot of people started to realize when we offered Create how much, and during the pandemic, how valuable the arts were in their lives. And they, so many people said we're missing this because they didn't know what to do. And it's not only that they didn't know what to do, they couldn't do anything. You couldn't go to a theater, you couldn't go where large numbers of people were congregating. And so the Create Festival was outdoors. There was distance between, the individuals creating the work. It was, only 10 people per workshop, very small scale. And so we sold out. People loved it.
Yeah.
And it was like literally of its time, which we didn't know that was going to happen. We had no idea. But it worked. And
Yeah.
so we've continued on with that festival, although we're now kind of rejigging it. And we're realizing, we really want to branch out, and we really want to start finding ways to just connect all of the artists within the community. So we are taking Create one step further. It's, more of an organic step, and we're moving it into what we see as eventually being called the Eastside Arts Festival, so that we can incorporate not just the visual arts, but we can incorporate the performing arts. And so that's evolving into something that hopefully one day will be quite a big festival that really celebrates all of the arts and all of the different art disciplines and activities that are happening within this community.
And also, so we also touched a bit upon the report, A City Without Art, No Net Loss Plus.
Yes.
And I just wanted to go back to that for a sec, because it mentioned on the website that report was also a big part of creating the Eastside Arts District.
Definitely.
Yeah, so can you tell us a little bit? I think maybe we've touched on it a bit, but maybe can you elaborate on what went into that report and what you found? What were the findings?
Yeah. I think that the report has been a real catalyst for many things. I think that the report really, because the people at the city were saying, we kept calling them up and we kept talking about 901 Main, and then we'd call them about this studio closing down and that studio closing down. And they said, well, we can't take this anecdotal evidence and we can't, or stories that you're telling us, and we can't do anything with them. And so we said, okay, what do you want us to do? And of course, they need numbers.
Yeah.
So we gave them numbers. We gave them a lot of numbers. And they like that. But the thing is that we were able to do that. And the reason we were able to do that is because we had a database of all of the artist studio spaces within this area. And so it was then a question of adding on those new spaces that we weren't familiar with, or that artists in those spaces don't participate in the crawl. So it was, I'm not saying easy for us to undertake this, because let me tell you, it was not. But it was easier for us to do this because we were already starting with this really great database. And so to be able to take that and then look at where we were 10 years ago and where we were at now, and then look at the losses and the bleeding that was already happening in terms of artist production space. And that if we continued on, not only are we going to lose the arts community, but we were also going to lose the crawl. Because if you don't have artist studios, what were we going to open our doors to? You know, the few art studios that people own, or that they have long-term leases on, or, you know, so it would be very few artist studios. And so we would lose something as unique as the culture crawl. And so, you know, it was a real kind of epiphany for us. To kind of go, this is critical. We're really at a critical stage here, and we need to do something. We need to do something about it. And you know, unfortunately, it took those numbers for people to kind of wake up and say, you know, this is critical, and something needs to be done. And so I think we're moving. You know, progress is slow, but it is progressing.
One step at a time.
And then one step at a time is better than no steps.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, you know, what I would have liked to have seen happen yesterday might not happen until 2 years from now.
Yeah.
But at least things are now in the works, and things are progressing. And so, and I think that people are taking, you know, the policymakers are taking this seriously, and are realizing that we are at a point in time where we need to be creating spaces. And this document definitely has contributed to that. Not just here. I mean, I'm proud to say that this is being now cited right across the country, and a lot of different municipalities are using this document to talk about artist spaces in their municipalities. So this is having a far greater reach than just this area. And so it's been extremely impactful.
And what about the no net loss plus? What's that?
Well, what we're saying is that we don't want to see any loss, and then we want to see plus. So we want to see, you know, spaces added.
Yes.
So that was an intentional thing.
Nice.
We don't want it just to maintain. We want to add to space, and that's where the plus is. We want what's here now, and we want more.
We want
more! In fact, yes, much more. Oh my goodness, how did that lead into that so naturally? I had no idea. We want more!
Are you watching this? We want more!
Wow, that's just so great.
That was so good, yes. And also, I think one thing with the report and the fact that you were able to communicate in a way that was received, you know, it's all part of building awareness too about this, what's happening in terms of the properties or the studio spaces, artists being evicted, and because a lot of people don't have the awareness of that. So it is very commendable, all of the work you're doing, and it is slow, but eventually I think that awareness will grow quicker and quicker to create more impact for the work that you're doing. But one thing I did want to mention that's, I believe is in the report, they talk about how the significant amount of artist studio spaces lost on the east side are due to rising land values, which we talked about, land speculation, and increasing property taxes, which has meant rising rents, redevelopment, and the loss of cultural production spaces. And just to talk about that idea of like these studios being cultural production spaces. Can you talk a little bit more about how the actual culture of our city is impacted by these spaces and people having spaces to create art?
Well, if you don't have spaces where people create art, then you don't need you don't need the performance halls, you don't need the Playhouse, you don't need, the Orpheum, you don't need the Vancouver Art Gallery, you don't need the Polygon Gallery, because if artists aren't creating and making work, then you don't need all of these other spaces. So I think people need to see things, on the spectrum. You need emerging artists who then develop into mid-career artists who then, show over here and are part of the Venice Biennale or what have you.
Yeah.
But you need somewhere where artists can be creating the work, because the work doesn't just magically appear in these spaces and places.
Yes.
Performers need to be rehearsing the work. They can't just get on a stage and then suddenly they're playing a symphony. They need places where they can be rehearsing the work. Thespians, they need to be, rehearsing. They need to be developing their scripts. Dancers, choreographers, they need spaces where they're developing the work. And that's behind the scenes. And I guess in a way it kind of comes back to, where we started this conversation with the Culture Crawl and us opening up the studios and people seeing what happens behind the scenes. And in a way, probably more of, the different art disciplines, perhaps need to be engaging a bit more in that so that people can see there's a lot of work that goes into any one exhibit, any one performance. This is not, it looks like magic and it's meant to look like magic and it's meant to look like it's flawless and it's seamless and all of those things. But behind the scenes, it's not that. No. And what's happening is very, very different. Now, part of it is the mystique of that and what you see on stage, and you get, captured and caught up in the music or the dance or the theater. But it's understanding that there's a lot of work that goes into any one production. You don't just stand up there and open the doors and boom, it's there. And artists need those spaces for that creation to happen.
And even aside from performing arts, but also visual arts too, the space to develop their style, for example, or explore and just play around. Even like the whole idea of playing and art go so well together, and I think maybe that playfulness would be taken away as well.
Well, and what I'm seeing, and a lot of people don't understand this yet, but you said to me earlier on about visiting, I can't remember whether it was a family member who's the artist or a friend of yours, and that they were sharing a studio with 5 or 6 artists. Now, that's great on some level, but on another level, what we're seeing is that artist spaces are getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. And when you go from, I said 2,000 square feet to 100 square feet, and then artists are thinking, well, how do I create work that's probably this big? And what is that doing? And when you're talking about the playfulness, but I'm talking about the development of the art form and about the discipline. And if you're starting to really constrict and restrict what an artist thinks that they can do because they have such space limitations, how do you think bigger than your 100 square feet? How do you think about bigger pieces, more epic pieces that would take up 2,000 square feet if you're working in a 100 square foot studio? You're really starting to close down the art form, and you're starting to say that only this smaller work is really what you're going to be able to do. And so in a way, it's kind of frightening to me to think that some of these large scale pieces that you see in the larger galleries that we are all in kind of awe of, wow, you got to create that, how amazing, that's just so moving, and you won't be able to see those pieces because how is an artist going to create those works in 100 square feet?
Almost like the scale is relative to the space, like
Almost.
The scale of what you can create is impacted by the size or scale of your studio.
It potentially is.
It can.
And I'm seeing it happen.
Yeah.
I'm seeing it happen more and more. And that to me is frightening because I think it's closing down the artist's ability to think bigger and to create on a scale that's much bigger than their studio space. and yeah, I think that will be less than, or the art form will be less than if we're moving in that direction, because only a few are going to be able to create work of that scale.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of the artists themselves, like everything that we've talked about the situation with studio spaces and access to studio spaces, how's that affecting artists who maybe were based in Vancouver, artists who want to be based in Vancouver?
Mm-hmm.
How does that affect their ability to actually create here?
Well, we're seeing a lot of artists move. I'll be perfectly
Just
frank.
leave the city.
Just leave the city. I
Yeah.
think people have just said, it's too much. I can't be doing this. I can't afford to do this any longer. It's just too much. Trying to make a living being an artist, supporting the studio space, and then also supporting your live environment, and then you throw in trying to raise a family. Well, that's it. I mean, these things are just way too challenging, and so we are seeing artists move, and that's another thing that I don't think people really understand the impact that's going to have on it. I'm always thinking on this sort of evolutionary kind of train of thought. What is that going to do to the art form? Because you're losing some really good artists. You might be losing artists that perhaps never would have pursued it anyway, and that's one thing. But are you also losing those artists that would have really contributed something so meaningful and so profound that we'll never know? We'll never know the answer to that. But we're losing good artists. And then once they shut down, then what are you left with? Only those artists who somehow are able to afford this space in this place at this particular time. And so you're going to see less and less artistic, and creativity. It's just going to close. Again, it's not going to happen like in the next 10 years, but it's certainly, if we continue this way, 20, 30, 40 years, it's closing the art form down.
Yeah.
You need places and spaces where people can express themselves. Bigger than 100 square feet.
It's so true. I mean, I think of, like, I have experience with the Beaumont Studios, which
right.
is technically on the west side, but
Yes.
but that's another one that I have experience with where they face so many challenges because of the property taxes, but it provides a home to over 100 artists, and it's been around for 20 years. This is their 20th year, so it has that impact of having a community built around it, but also the physical space and gathering space for events and other things like that. But it's one where, I see that threat happening over the past couple of years, and that if it shuts down right there's not only 100 artists who actually use the space, but the wider community who gather there, who go to events there.
Exactly. It's huge.
Yeah.
It's huge.
Yeah.
In sometimes the policymakers, they don't see that. They don't see the impact of that. I mean, you look at in this community, you look at Parker Street. I mean, there's 200 and plus artists there. What would happen if something happened to Parker Street? I don't think anything is.
Yeah.
Just to reassure everybody out there
it's all
at
good.
Parker Street, I think it's all good myself, from what I'm aware of. But, you've got this like incredible, iconic building that has 200 plus artists. And you want to maintain that, because there's not just, it's not just about the public coming in and seeing it. There's what goes on inside of that building, the peer-to-peer exchanges that happen, the artists, working together and doing projects together and getting ideas from each other and sharing resources. There's a whole kind of, ecosystem that's happening within that building that is really unique, and you can't replicate that. You can't make that just happen somewhere. And where would you make that happen with that many artists? Where is there a building that can accommodate those, that many artists. But the exchanges that are happening and how people help each other within that building. You've got new artists who perhaps don't know how to hang a show and they want to open for the crawl. You've got somebody who's going to help them do that.
Yeah.
Help them price their work, help them clean up their studios so it looks like, people want to come in and look at the work. And, all of those things happen. Those are kind of intangible kind of impacts that things like the crawl has, buildings that have, like the Beaumont buildings that have, those that many artists within them, that are really important, but they're intangible and they're kind of hard to quantify. But that's what's making those buildings tick, is that there's this whole kind of internal exchanges that are happening.
That's so true. The collaboration, even just having all these people around you can bounce ideas off of, those interactions it's so true. You can't really measure them, but they add such an integral part of that ecosystem, as you said. And a lot of visual artists are singular. They're singular in their sort of their vision, but they are influenced by other artists, by conversations that you're having, or the work that another artist is doing. It's important. It's really important to have that. And so, we really need to ensure that those places are safe from redevelopment. And so we're talking a little bit about the culture crawl. I want to go a little bit into it. So would you say it's kind of like the core programming of the Eastside Arts Society?
Yeah, I would. I mean, it's something that a lot of people are. I'm surprised actually that there are people who don't know what the culture crawl is. But and then people say to me, "Oh, well, I talked to somebody and they didn't know what the culture crawl was," and I said, "Good, that's an opportunity for you to tell them, because I don't believe that everybody knows about the culture crawl." And so I when I hear that people don't know, then I feel like, yes, we need to reach that much further. And so we attempt, with our marketing and publicity campaigns to do that, and to deepen that reach every year. And we've been successful in doing that.
Yeah. And it's such a cool festival because it invites the public into the artists' working studios. As you mentioned, there's over 500 artists who participate, but also over 45,000 members of the public who also participate. It's over 2 weeks.
No,
right?
it's only 1 weekend.
Oh, okay.
Only 1 weekend. We're only 4 days, and we're not expanding either.
Okay.
Just so you know, because you only have 4 days.
That's all you got
to come and see everything.
Yes.
That's it. So you're either here or you're not.
Yes. And it people are walking outside. So it's like open studios, but you're actually crawling from one to the other.
From one to the other.
Outdoors, walking through the area or neighborhood. Do you recommend people make a plan for their culture call, or just wing it?
Well, I say go ahead and make a plan, but good luck. And the reason I say that is because I've seen people say, Esther, this is what I'm going to do, and then I'll meet you, and I go, oh yeah, sure, okay. But what happens is that you go to this so you go online, and we have a really good website, and so you can see what the new work that the artists have created and are showcasing this year. And so people will go there and they're like, oh, I'm interested in sculpture. I want to go and see the woodworking or the furniture or what have you. And so they come up with this list. And then what I find is that, they get to 2 studios and then they see something and then that's it. They're distracted. and that blows their whole schedule.
Yeah.
And it's like once they're trapped, they're just like, once they go down that rabbit hole
Yeah.
where they break from their schedule, they never get back on track. And they go, oh, I wanted to get to, so-and-so studio
Yeah.
and I never did. And like, oh, really? What happened? And so they go, well, I went to blah, blah, and I that was on my list. And then I got to so-and-so studio and it was like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. And then they, so go ahead, plan away. I doubt that you'll kind of get to the studios that you wanted to, but, and that's the beauty of the crawl, is that there's just always something new, always something unexpected that's just going to draw you in and take you to places that you didn't think you would end up.
Yeah.
And so, and then also you run into somebody, and this happens to me, and they go, oh, Esther, did you go to, and I said, no, well, you got to go see so-and-so's work. And I'm like, okay, that's where I'm going now. And so it happens to me all the time. And I'm trying to see some of the new artists that have come in. I can only see so many because I'm only one person, and there's I can only be in one place at any one time. And so I do try to get to as much as I can, but it's really difficult.
Yeah.
It's really difficult.
And that exploration and discovery is such an amazing part of that experience too, where you will get distracted.
Yeah.
And or your path will go in ways you couldn't have expected, which leads just to like incredible surprises or stuff you couldn't have planned, spontaneous experiences, which is such a cool aspect of it too.
It is. Just go with the flow. Just go with the flow.
Go with the flow.
Just let it
go with the flow.
Guide you, follow people. And then, and the other thing that happens, which is quite interesting, is that people start talking to other people. And then somebody says, well, because they'll stop somebody and they'll say, oh, I need to go here. And then the person will say, yeah, but, I was just in this studio. You should go in here. And then just a random stranger says that to another stranger.
Yeah.
And then that person goes, oh, okay, I'll go in here. And I see that happening. And so the connections, that are happening with the public and the excitement of what they just, saw and participated in, and they're telling other people that they don't know, just strangers, and then those people go there. So it's pretty unique.
Yes, it is such a unique festival.
Yeah.
And creates unique experiences for everybody. So we are, we're getting close to the end of our time together. I have a few more questions, but one thing is, so in terms of Eastside Arts Society, I just want to do like a rapid fire listing of everything under the umbrella. So there's the culture crawl.
Yes, well, there's the public facing stuff, which is the culture crawl, which happens 4 days, the third week in November.
Yeah.
Don't quote me on the dates here. I think we're 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th.
For this year?
Yeah,
okay.
It changes every year.
Yeah.
And this year it's kind of early just because of when the third weekend falls. We have the Create Festival in the summer.
Arts Festival,
July 22nd to the 28th.
Yeah.
We have preview exhibits that happen in curated exhibits that happen before the crawl opens. And so that usually opens up in the first week of November.
Okay.
And that happens at it's an exhibit with like 80 plus artists, and that will happen at the Pendulum, at the Culture, a place called Alternative Creations, and Strange Fellows Brewery.
Nice.
And then we have something called Moving Art, Film and Video, because that was a way that we could showcase film and video artists, many who perhaps don't have studios. And then we have something called Talking Art, where it's a series of artist talks that we do about a week before the culture crawl starts.
Nice.
So we have that happening. We also, behind the scenes, we do a lot of work in terms of we offer artist professional development
workshops.
Exactly. And then we do a lot of, we're not allowed to use this word, advocacy. Work. You're not allowed to, as a charity. So we don't do advocacy work. Oh, no. Did I say that? No, we don't do that. But we work towards sort of supporting artists in different ways that helps build their capacity. So, when we hear about artists being evicted or, that their rents have gone up, and is there something that we can do? And sometimes there is, and there is, and sometimes there isn't. But we're certainly here. We certainly listen. We certainly try to do whatever it is that we can do to support artists. And then, of course, we're developing this whole other, three-headed monster. As if we didn't have enough work to do, called the Eastside Arts District.
Yes.
And we really want this to become a big thing. And both in terms of the public, finding the different, art activities that are happening in this community, but then also on the back end, strengthening the arts community, and then space is really the critical component in doing that. There are other things, but without space, you're not going to have artists producing work, regardless of whether you're a visual artist, a choreographer, a thespian, a musician. Doesn't matter. You need the space.
That's really the crux of it. Yes.
It is the crux.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then I saw Studio 101 as
well.
well.
Oh, how can I forget that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
I love that. Studio 101 started with just one classroom. And what we realized is that, is that, in this community, it is quite challenged financially. And a lot of the kids in this neighborhood never been in an artist studios. So we developed this program where we work with the 4 elementary schools in this catchment area. And we contract the artists. And the students go into an artist studio, and they get to make a work of art.
Nice.
Yeah. So either it could be ceramics, it could be a painting, it could be collage. We've done some filmmaking, and so last year we worked with 240 students within the community. It's free.
Yeah.
For the schools and for the students, and it's kind of a good time of year because then the students get to make something that, it can be a gift either for, during the holiday season, whether it's Hanukkah or Christmas or, something that they can give to their parents or their caregiver or whoever.
Yeah.
But a lot of these kids, we work with grade 5 to grade 7. And they come into the studio and they're just wowed by, these environments because they're pretty wild.
Yeah.
Some of the things that artists have, like skull heads and
Yeah.
Artist studios are intriguing.
Oh,
There's no
yes.
question about that.
Yeah.
And so the kids they've never seen anything like that. And they love the freight elevators in some of the buildings that we take them in.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a whole new world that's opened up for
Seriously.
them. And it's one of my favorite times of the year. The crawl comes down, and then we get to take these kids over into these artist studios, and just the wow factor and the awe, and they're just like, what is this? Where are we? What's going on here?
What world have we walked
What
into?
world have we walked into?
Yeah.
Really, it's
Yeah.
just like, I mean, if you think adults are in awe, and then you see these kids, they've never seen anything like it. Oh, it's fantastic. It's a great program. We started it 15 years ago.
Wow.
As I said, we offer it for free. We just do the fundraising and make sure that, we're able to support the artist because we don't ask the artist to do the work for free.
Absolutely. That's part of
part of what we're all
Yes.
about as well, is that, we're about building capacity for artists, and everybody likes to ask artists to, and artists are incredibly giving,
Yes.
but at the same time, they also have to make a living and they have to eat.
Yes.
And they've got children to feed and they've got rents to pay. So, but they are, the artistic community is one of the most giving communities. And I know, a while ago, a few decades ago, one of our not so enlightened prime ministers said something about artists that all we do is we go to gala dues, We just go to these galas and we're just like eating and we're just drinking. And I was just so irate over that because one of the reasons that galas, exist and the way that they make money is because so many artists contribute to those causes. They contribute to cancer and diabetes and you name it, they contribute because artists are, to me, one of the most giving, groups of people. And the reason that those those organizations are able to make money is because artists have donated artwork, whether it's performance or, a painting. And so, and for that, they might get a cocktail and a couple of little appetizers, seriously, and their work is worth thousands of dollars that a nonprofit is making to help support a particular cause. So, anyway, don't get me started on that. I'm gonna rail about it.
Yeah, but actually, and supporting the artists in terms of fair payment for their work. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I get a lot of phone calls here where people go, "Oh, I have this great idea," and I'm like, let's hear it. Let's hear it.
Yeah.
And let's have this artist do this, and I'm like, that's great, that's nice.
Yeah.
And then payment would be what exactly? Yeah. Well, I just thought, and I say, think no more.
Hold it right there.
Hold it right there. If you're willing to pay for the artist to do this mural or to do this work, fine, I will promote that. But if you're not, think about it. Or dentists, doctors, anybody, are they asked to do all their services for free? No. But for some reason, that seems to be, the way that people look at the artistic community. It's just there for just the asking all of the time.
Which is not true. They're also professional, working people.
They are, and they need to eat.
Yes.
And they have rents to pay, and they have children that they need to feed as well. And so, I think it's really important. I mean, this is part of educating the public, and for people to get a better understanding. And when that and I like saying ex-prime minister, I mean, shame on him for making such a statement and not understanding and valuing what artists do in this society and truly how giving they are.
Obviously,
on so many
that
levels.
Person hadn't been to East Vancouver.
But they've been to lots of events, and they don't realize that all of that artwork was donated. Those performances that they were experiencing were donated. And it's because all of those artists said, yes, we believe in this cause and we are going to do this. And so, a lot of people need to be educated in that way.
And in terms of Eastside Arts Society, how can people support the work of Eastside Arts Society?
Well, they can support by, coming to all of our events. And, of course, they can donate. And we are a charitable organization.
Get the tax receipts.
You get the tax receipt, and you get to support art making in this city, and all of the work that we do to ensure that this that art and artists remain in this city, and that there's opportunities for artists to exist here, and that's really what you're supporting. Absolutely.
And in terms, you mentioned the crow. I wanted to ask about the crow.
Oh, well, and that's an interesting evolution.
Yeah. And what is the significance of the crow?
Well, in our early days, we had other creatures and because in those days we were actually kind of fairly, irreverent, and we were coming up with things like cockroaches and that we thought were like very East End,
Yeah.
And then we thought, well, maybe the public wouldn't like that so much. So the cockroach sort of, and then because we're on a flight path here. Yeah. And so you have, on a daily basis, you have the crows around 6 o'clock, coming past this area.
Yeah.
And then moving on to Burnaby where they nest. So, but they come through this area every single day in the around dusk.
Yes.
And so crows are an important part of this neighborhood. So.
Yeah. They're everywhere.
They're everywhere, yeah. And so it really, and then crows, once you delve into them, are pretty intriguing birds, and they're very intelligent, and there's a lot to be said about the crow. So
yes.
So we took that on as our mascot, I guess you could call it.
I think it's lovingly embraced, you know?
It is.
Yes.
It is. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then finally, just want to ask about the goals for the coming few years. Is Eastside Arts District kind of that pivot for future planning?
It is, yeah, and it's really strengthening the Eastside Arts District. It's finding the means to sustain it, and so we have ideas and suggestions as to how that's going to play out. But I really do think that this is going to really shine a light on this area. It's going to shine a light on the need, and even bigger light on the need for artist production space and how critical it is to have that if we want a city with art. This is really an important ingredient in doing that.
And what about yourself? You've been executive artistic director,
yes.
You said, for 12 years.
Yes, yeah.
What's happening with you? What are your
plans?
plans?
You know, I'm actually gonna be moving on soon. Not like, off the planet or anything like that. But I've reached a certain point in time. I don't know when. I haven't really sort of settled on a date, but I really do want to see the Eastside Arts District sort of solidified and really really solid. And so I have a few more years, but I really want to get back to my art practice, and I want to travel quite a bit. So that's and I'm really strengthening our team here, and there'll be people who will be able to take this mantle on and continue on, for sure.
That's incredible. Well, that brings us to the end of the interview. Thank you so much, Esther, for your time today. Also for just opening up and explaining thoroughly all these different aspects of the Eastside Arts Society, because it does encompass many facets. We got the Eastside Arts Society, the Culture Crawl, we have the Create Arts Festival, the study.
Yes.
And A City Without Art, No Net Loss Plus, and now Eastside Arts District and Studio 101. So thank you so much. I feel like we provided a lot of information about the organization and all its initiatives, and that was part of our goal today. So thank you everybody for watching. Thank you so much for your time, Esther. Thanks for inviting us into the office.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be able to have this, as an opportunity to talk about the work that we do and to further kind of expose it to people both within Vancouver and beyond those boundaries. So really appreciate having this opportunity.
It is our pleasure. This has been a jazzy production. We want to shout out TELUS and STORYHIVE for funding this show. This has been Vancity Beats, Eats, and more! Yeah.